All right, well, I will start now just to kind of give that overview. So as we have all discussed, the shading category with roller shades in exterior use is huge. And I pulled this from the price book just to kind of provide a couple of examples as we were just talking to Lori about not only shade to go on an outdoor covered area or on one of our structures, but the category of mounting exterior shades on the outside of a house is huge. The fit and finish with the valances and the track options and how the product kind of just goes away when it's not in use really is one that many homeowners buy into, and especially because they often have a concern about mounting more shades or more components on the inside of their house when maybe it's not something that they're going to have to use all year long. So don't overlook the category of an exterior shade just used to provide shade to a window. All of the motorization for polar shades is done through Somfy, and Somfy has a huge range of components, timers, wind sensors, temperature sensors. So for an outside window, it could even be programmed so that the client can say from June to September, every day at 2 o'clock, that shade needs to come down. And at 6 o'clock, it needs to retract. That's the kind of sophisticated timers that are available. So huge category even just for a window. What I want to do today is mainly pare down the selection so that everybody feels comfortable with talking about the product. Once the interest is determined, there are general questions that can be asked. If you get the answers to those questions, then I can help you, or Elise can help to ensure you're specifying the right product. So, to start off with, we have basically 3 shade categories, and the size of the shade is going to determine which category you're in. If you would like to have that at your fingertips, we have what we call our exterior shade comparison chart. And very simply, by looking at this chart, you would be able to tell your client that that exterior shade could be put into a 5.5-inch cassette box, for instance. Or because of that size of shade, it will fit into our Freedom hood. If you don't want to get into that detail, again, just get the sizes and work with Elise or work with me, and I will tell you exactly how that shade is going to be designed. The options that you want to know about, first of all, you want to ask your client if they would like a valance covering on their shade. Oftentimes they'll say, what does that mean? When you don't sell the shade with a valance, you're going to have just an open roll mounted at the top of your structure or at the top of your window. And when that shade is not in use, that open roll is going to be exposed. In terms of a cost-saving measure, if they're really trying to pare down what they need, you can sell it as an open roll. The fabric is sold as an exterior product. Even in a motorized version, the motor is completely concealed inside the roller tube. It's just fit and finish, and over the long term, the long period of time, it certainly is better to have a covering over that roller tube. So if the answer is yes, I want my roller tube covered. We have cassette boxes, and we have curved hoods. This is the 5.5-inch cassette box, and this is the 4.5-inch cassette box. And the determination is based on the size of the shade because of the size of the roller tube. This is a cassette box that for the most part will work with shades up to 14 feet in height and 11 feet in drop. And this cassette box is larger, so it's going to cover larger categories. With this cassette box, it is attached with either a wall bracket, which is this back portion here, Or if you're doing a soffit mount, then you would use this soffit mount bracket. So that's another question when you get down the road in terms of the cassette box. Will this be an inside mount or an outside mount? Or other terminology, is this a wall mount or a soffit mount? Is it going to attach overhead or behind? And that will help us determine the kind of bracket to send out. So cassette box is going to take the majority of your sales. People are going to want the full-on cassette box. A couple of features of the cassette box: it has a removable cover. So if the client ever down the road wants to do a recover on their shade, for instance, it is very easy to do, to remove the roller shade. They don't have to take the whole thing down. There are 2 screws on the sides of the cassette box. You remove those screws, and this cover is hinged onto the back, and it lifts up, and you can remove the roller tubes. So it's designed for ease in servicing down the road. The hoods, and this is for the smaller shade, and there's a larger one. This is a way to cover the shade, bring the cost down a bit, or if your client just has a lot of curves in the design of their home and they want something more with a curve, this can be sold for a wall mount application. It is a 3-sided hood. The back will basically be covered when you put it against the wall. It is not completely sealed like a cassette box is. There's a gap here that you would have to caulk if you're really trying to water seal for the most part. And the other thing to remember is this cannot be done as a ceiling mount, because if you were to ceiling mount it, it blocks the shade. So wall mount only. So 3 valance options, either none at all, and you'll end up with just an open roll. The shade will function properly. Everything is made for exterior use. You have a cassette box, either the 4.5 inch or the 5.5 inch. I'll help you determine which size you're going to need, or you can refer to the exterior comparison chart. And then the third option, a step down in price from the cassette box, is the hood, either the Freedom hood or the larger Patriot hood, but wall mount only. So those are valances. The next question you want to ask your client is whether they would like to have any type of side guides. And they will often say, what does that mean? Well, with a side guide, you are, at the first level, you are controlling the movement of the hem bar. So unlike a backyard blind where the shade just hangs, and unless the customer does something to secure it, the shade will move in and out if it's windy. With a side channel, and this is the smaller shade application, the hem bar sits in a track. So if it's windy, that hem bar cannot move. When the shade is retracted, the hem bar comes down to the bottom. When the shade, or when it's extended, when it's retracted, the hem bar comes all the way up, and it sits just below the cassette box. So that's the smaller size side channel, and then as you get into larger shades, this is the application for the larger shade. Now with the side channel is connected to the hem bar, but the fabric sits just outside of the shade. So picture it this way. The fabric is not connected. That's the main thing I want you to know. So if the wind blows, the wind will blow against the shade, and the shade can billow. And what will happen is, if the wind is really strong, the hem bar can raise and lower. It's not going to go up 3 feet, but it may raise up a foot. And the edge will always have a gap, and of course when it's windy, if the fabric is billowing, it'll be a larger gap. So that's not the application to sell if somebody says, I want to make like a screened-in porch to keep the bugs out. It's just to keep that hem bar from blowing in and out, or against a wall. If you were doing a window shade, you would not want to have that hem bar hitting your house in the wind. So side channel. Obviously the side channel, you must have a post or a wall to attach it to. So if you don't have structure, or if your patio cover has a post and then there's a built-out stone pedestal, you're probably not going to be able to make this work. So the other option is a cable guide, and with the cable guide, there's a steel cable that is attached at the top of the shade. It goes through the hem bar. Depending on which size, there are loops on the hem bar. It goes through the hem bar and attaches to a bracket that is either on the floor or attached to a wall. So again, the functionality is such that it keeps that hem bar in place. There is no upcharge to add either side channels or cable guide to any exterior shade. So you should always mention that, because it's part of the fit and finish that comes with these exterior shades at no additional cost. So any questions on side channels or cable guides? All right.
Yeah, the only question I have, I guess, is when we talk about wind.
Yes.
You know, how, we always worry about when, damaging your systems.
That's a good question, Colin. And the way that I answer that is to say, first of all, if high winds are really an issue and there's a huge concern about damage to the shades, then you should sell that shade with a wind sensor. Because a wind sensor, a Somfy wind sensor, is typically set to retract that shade around 25-30 miles an hour. And all of these applications are going to be just fine in those ranges. However, a wind sensor is not 100% foolproof, so I would never advocate to your client, leave your shades down, go on vacation, and as long as you have a wind sensor, it'll be fine. The wind sensor is just another step to help you protect your shade while it's down and while you are there. So wind sensor is a good option. The second thing I would say is, because fabric is not connected to a track with side channel and cable guide, you really run less of a risk of damage, because it's really just going to be blowing against that fabric. And as it blows against the fabric will billow in, causing the hem bar to raise. Mm-hmm. So you don't have that sail effect that you do like you will with the zipper shade, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So really, if you can just picture strong wind blowing against the shade, as it billows out, the hem bar lifts up, and then as the wind lessens, it comes down.
Does it work the same with the cable guide?
Yes.
It just goes up.
Just as good as slide up. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Bree. If given the choice, I would always go with side channel as opposed to cable guide, because the hem bar will tend to lift, will have more resistance with the side channel than it will with the cable guide. So you're going to get less lifting with the cable guide, or with the side channel, than you will with the cable guide. So if there's a wall,
if there's a way to do side channel,
absolutely, yes. And I just think the fit and finish is better. You've got nice tracks there as opposed to a cable. With the cable guide, if this is wall mounted, you can see you're going to have that cable always in place about an inch out from your wall, or wherever you've installed it. Another thing, you can combine side channels and cable guides. So let's say, for instance, you have a very large opening. This shade on this side was an example. So a very large opening, and you're going to do two side-by-side shades, but there's no structure in the center. You could do side channels on either side, and then you could use cable guides in the center. Okay. Just keep in mind, so you'll always have that steel cable.
You can't mix your guides.
And that cable is just always there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because they always have the
Exactly.
hem bar at the bottom with it, so it's the same concept.
Exactly. And here's an example, and we're going to have that on the display. Here's, you've got your cable guide end cap here and the side channel on the other side. I have seen situations where people put just a small planter and that cable guide is there, so that having that cable always in place is less of an issue, someone running into it, for instance. Or maybe you've got a wall, and then in the center of your patio, you have one of the post structures on a stone pedestal. So you could do your side channel on the side and do your cable guide where you've got that uneven
Right.
surface.
That's
So you can combine those.
great application.
Mhm.
Right.
And again, no upcharge to add that to any exterior shade. So it's a really, really nice feature.
So on the wind, does it matter what mesh we're using?
Good question. So obviously the more open the fabric is, the more airflow you're going to get. But even on like a Suntex 80 or 90, it still is not going to flow freely through it. So you will get some billowing.
But if I had a windy area, would it make more sense to go with more open fabric?
Do more open. It's such
not-
a toss-up.
it's a
Is
very
80% going to be enough sun protection
Right.
to warrant that?
Right.
If it's a very windy area, I would definitely err on the side of caution by doing side channel cable guide versus zip track.
And here's my other question. I mean, obviously we have a warranty on the product,
Mm-hmm.
but if it is in a high windy area and it breaks, that's wind, that's not going to be covered under
That's
warranty.
correct. So the warranty, Polar Shades offers a limited lifetime warranty on all of their products except for the exterior clutch, which I don't know that we would sell here because it's very similar to a backyard blind.
Right.
And we just feel over time, you're not going to get the same longevity with a clutch that you are with a crank. So outside of that category, all the exterior shades have a limited lifetime warranty, which means that your hardware, your tracks, etc., are going to function properly. The fabric is manufactured by is warranted by the manufacturer. Suntex products, the 95, the 80, and 90, another reason why I always push those is they have a 10-year warranty. Once you move into a sheer weave product, they will be exterior rated, but they only have a 5-year warranty. So that 10-year warranty covers degradation of the fabric. It's going to provide the same solar protection for 10 years. Over time, is it going to fade? Anything will fade in the right conditions over time, and the manufacturers are not going to warranty that. But the Suntex products, the 90, the 80, and the 95 are excellent exterior products. Motorization through Somfy is warranted for 5 years. So if a motor fails, a remote's not working, a wind sensor within that 5-year period, it's going to be covered by their warranty. Yes?
Can you touch more on the solar powered socket?
Yes, yes. So there are 2 different classifications for the solar powered motor. There's a 6 Newton meter and a 10 Newton meter, and I believe Somfy's coming out with the 12. Right now, that highest level category, the 10 Newton meter, is going to operate a shade, I'm going to say, in the range of 10 to 12 feet widthwise. And in fact, the shade here, we're actually doing with a 6 Newton meter. So, can you use an auto sun motor on an 18-foot shade? I don't believe so. perhaps when the new generation AutoSun motor comes out, you'll be able to, but right now there's limitations as to what it can lift. So with the solar powered motor, it's great for those applications where you don't have power and you don't want to pull power. And as long as it is in daylight, SOMFI is indicating that that motor is going to work properly. SOMFI indicates that you will be able to get 1 up and 1 down per day. However, I talked to our installers because I was kind of thinking, all right, how do we manage that with programming and all of that? And he was saying once that battery is fully charged, they use them at home shows, and that's going up and down multiple times. So depending on the application, you know, somebody said, well, I'm going to use it for a daycare area and I'm going to be opening and closing that multiple times. We may want to do some more investigations so we don't oversell the product. But in most residential situations where you're going to have, you want shade at a certain time and then you're going to retract it, it's a great application. It has a pretty hefty price point. It is, depending on the size, around $1,100 at retail. But when you look at that price and you look at the price of a motor, which is going to be a hardwired motor, going to be maybe $600–700 depending on the shade, and then if you had to have an electrician out, it's really a wash.
Plus the ad on your bill.
That's right.
Too.
That's right. So there's a small panel,
Go
and we'll be
green
able
or
to.
go home.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's
Save the
right.
planet.
Save the planet.
So when we videotape the system, we should show how large the panel is. It's roughly like this. And so on the Equinox, if it's mounted at the top, you're hardly going to see it, and that's what's going to power the shade.
How cool.
So, it
Solar
is.
powered
Should we have
mover
that thing?
and solar powered
Pardon?
station.
I have that thing open right
The motor gets charged in the office before it's sent out.
now. Okay.
So
Okay.
it'll just be ongoing, but it'll need to be. So I checked on that.
Okay.
So did that answer your question, Don?
Yes, can
Okay.
you still have all the functionality with SOMFI?
Yes.
The wind sensors?
Yes.
Now, on a retractable awning, a wind sensor is really a motion detector.
Right.
How
And
does it
what
work on the shade?
right. What we recommend on shades is a paddle sensor. And so it's one of those whirlybirds.
Okay.
Because a motion sensor, the wind has to hit that shade in a very specific way
Mhm.
in order to cause that shade to retract. The whirlybird kind of wind sensor is great because it can detect wind coming before it hits the shade and cause that shade to retract. And then you could set it up with a sun sensor. I never recommend a sun sensor unless you have a wind sensor, because think of the application. You've got a sunny day and it's hurricane, you know, wind forces. That shade's going to want to keep extending. So you should never sell a sun sensor without a wind sensor. But if you do both, wind will always override the sun sensor. So
Plus, it's great to say whirlybird.
it is great to say
That's a
whirlybird.
great.
Is that the
I wrote
actual-
that down. Really
Whirlybird.
That's not the name.
That's smart.
Yeah,
No.
whirlybird.
Actually, I think they're called like paddle cups, but I like
I
whirlybird.
do too.
Whirlybird.
Whirlybird. I mean, I
If
knew
somebody
what
said
I knew
whirlybird-
what
You knew what I
whirlybird
meant.
was. I didn't know
That's
what
right.
paddle was.
No,
I
if somebody
know.
offered me a whirlybird, I'd buy it
You would.
right away.
It's like Dr. Seuss.
Polar Shades selling points. Always offer the whirlybird.
You'll sell it right away.
Do you want the whirlybird with that?
All right, so let's move into the Cadillac of guide options, and we'll have one here on display, and that is the zipper truck. So unlike the side channel, when you sell a shade with zipper track, not only is the hem bar connected to the track, but the fabric is connected as well. Complete connection. And I love to show this, and this would be good in an open house if people say, well, you know, does that really hold up? You know, showing them this shows you the functionality of this. So when you have a client that says, I need to create a bug-proof patio area, I'm really concerned about that, this is what you sell. When you have a client that says, I really want to be able to climate control my patio area, do you have anything retractable? You really want to sell a zipper shade. You could sell this with the Ferrari pre-constraint fabric. You wouldn't be able to see through it unless you put a window in a zipper truck, and the functionality of a vinyl fabric in a zipper truck like this, completely enclosing a patio, is such that you could run a heater or an air conditioner inside and do so very efficiently. When the wind blows, it's not going to cause the fabric to billow and then create that gap on the side. When the wind blows, the fabric doesn't billow, allowing bugs to come in on the side. There is a complete connection between the fabric and the track. More susceptible to wind damage, so you definitely want to have that conversation. This is not to be left out in winds that are 50 miles an hour. What is the wind rating? We at Polar Shades have not put that into print. We say if there's a concern, sell it with a wind sensor. And when people say, you know, what exactly does that mean? Then I say a wind sensor will cause that shade to retract at 25 or 30 miles an hour, and your shade will be perfectly fine in that type of wind.
One of the things about wind is wind normally is not a constant. It has gusts.
Right.
And so that's what really creates problems with systems.
That's right.
Is you can say, okay, it's fine for 30 miles an hour. Well, you could have a consistent 25 mile an hour wind, and then all of a sudden, boom, you know.
And the load is not consistent either.
Right.
Right.
That's why when we're sailing, a lot of times we flip our boats because you get a
Catches
gust
you
of
by
wind.
Just that
surprise.
one time, because we were winning.
We were winning the race, and then Don forgot to let
Don.
the sheet, and then
Release the sheet.
yeah, I said release the sheet, Don. He did not.
That was America's Cup in
Yeah.
yeah.
74.
Oh, I thought it was in the
50s.
When you order a zipper shade, you will also receive this lovely add-on gasket. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because remember, when everything's retracted, this is what's hanging down. And we'll talk a little bit about measuring to accommodate for that. But the great thing is that most patios slope. So if you have a sloping patio and you're trying to create that bug-proof room, or you're trying to keep the rain out, this is great because your shade will come down to the highest point. And assuming that you don't have a 3-inch differential, it will flatten at the highest point, and the gasket helps to fill in that lower point. So it's a really nice thing. If your customer doesn't like this, it slides in and off of the hem bar. So, and this is available in gray and black. So all of these things are designed to really help you completely enclose that area.
But when the shade is up, you do see that gasket.
Yes, yes.
So that's what you were saying, that maybe it's not the greatest look up, but
Right.
certainly down it's very functional.
Right. So a little bit about measuring, since we're kind of on that track. Keep in mind that when you mount the cassette box and the shade is retracted, this will still be hanging below your box, the hem bar, and the gasket will hang down below that. So for that reason, our measuring instructions give you some guidelines if you're doing a wall mount. Because with the wall mount, as long as you've got enough wall space, raise that box up. Don't just set it right above the opening. Raise the box up enough so that when the shade is retracted, the hem bar's there and the gasket, and it's still against the wall. On a wall, that, is easy. Or on a patio, if you have a choice between doing a soffit mount or going outside and mounting above, that might be a determining factor. Because keep in mind that if you mount this as a soffit mount on a patio cover, you're dropping your clearance. And you're dropping it by the height of the box, the height of the hem bar, and the gasket. So just keep that in mind if that is an issue. When we take measurements, keep in mind that with exterior shades, the measurements you give will reflect the outside measurements of that shade. So if you order a shade that is 10 feet in drop, that means from the top of the cassette box to the bottom of the hem bar, when that shade is extended, that's how long it will be. And if you order it 12 feet in width, that means outside edge of cassette box to outside edge of cassette box is 12 feet. And because the tracks always line up with the outside edge of the cassette box, that also means outside of track to outside of track. So if you have an opening on your patio and you're going to do an outside mount, if the opening is 10 feet, you do not want to order that shade at 10 feet because you will have no way you won't be able to attach the track. So you need to measure to the outside and add the additional space for the track to get, so you have that mounting space. On the height, another tip, I always recommend that you take 2 height measurements because you typically do have a sloping situation. Always order your shade for the longest measurement. Can the shade angle and fill in? No. The gasket will help with that on a zipper track. But what it will allow you to do is to have tracks that are long enough. You'll have to cut off one side, but it'll go all the way to the floor. And the long side will still go all the way to the floor. If you order based on the shortest length, then chances are you're going to have an inch below and it's going to look unfinished. And when you are programming your shade, you set the limits at the appropriate point. So when the shade goes down as far as it can, you set that limit knowing that on the lower side you still have some space there. So 2 measurements on the height, and then we'll order it based on the longest measurement. For an inside mount shade, since we're trying to fit inside of an opening, it is really important to take 3 width measurements, top, middle, and bottom. And notice whether, I don't want to complicate things, notice whether there are any obstructions. Whatever the narrowest measurement is, the shade should be ordered based on that narrowest measurement. One thing that Polar Shades has created, which is really, really amazing and a huge time saver, is a U-channel. So when you are installing a zipper track and you have an uneven opening, tracks have to be parallel. We can't have the tracks slanted. They have to be parallel. So on a wall mount, you just make sure you always mount those tracks parallel, measuring at the top and the bottom. But on an inside mount, you don't have that luxury, and chances are it's not going to be parallel and true. So you take this and let's say this is your wall, and let's say the opening is slightly larger at the top than it is at the bottom. You mount the U-channel flush against the wall or the post. Get a good connection. Then the way that you correct those uneven walls is in how you insert the zipper track. Because the zipper track then can be adjusted so that you have the correct measurement outside of track to outside of track to match your shade width. But you've also taken care of the fact that at the top we had 84 inches and at the bottom we had 86. So you're going to be pulling this out farther to true that up. Once you get the correct angle, the installer will put a set screw at the top and the bottom to hold it in place.
Genius.
But it is a huge time saver for installers. Any kind of track that the only way to attach it is just straight against the wall, what the manufacturer will tell you is, well, you need to bring out some wood or some other products and true that up before you can attach the track. Yes,
So
Don?
that's zipper track.
Yes.
Does it always come with that U-channel?
If you order it as an inside mount,
Got
yes.
it. Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
Now, like the application that we're doing here with side channel, where we needed to take that side channel off the post.
Right.
If it's the larger profile track, you can also use it with this. So even on a side channel where you don't have a perfectly parallel opening, or in the case of a manual shade, so now's a good segue to talk about that. When you have a manual shade, the crank and loop clearance that is needed so that you can easily turn that is different than it would be with a motorized shade. So when you're doing an inside mount manual shade, if you come to me asking me for a quote request, the first thing I'll say is, are you sure you want to do a manual shade? You know, does Mrs. Jones really want to crank that 16-foot shade? Have you mentioned to her, you know, that that's going to take some muscle power? Yes, we've been through that. That's what she wants. Okay, so the thing we do with a manual crank shade is to take the narrowest measurement and deduct 1 inch. When the shade is installed, the cassette box goes all the way over to the end on the non-crank side, so that we're leaving roughly 1 inch on the crank side. So the non-crank side goes all the way over as far as it can, leaving more clearance on the crank side. Which brings us to side channels or zipper track. The side channel or the zipper track must always line up with the outside edge of the cassette box. So what do we do about that post that's roughly 1 inch away? We can't mount this to that post. But what we can do is use the U-channel, attach that to the post, insert this in so that we've got that connection and that spacing that we need.
So zipper track inside mount comes with the U-channel. Is
Yes.
that true of?
Not with side channel, so
So
you'd
you
have
just
to ask
order
for
that.
it.
Okay.
Right,
All right.
right. And one of the reasons that the zipper track inside mount always comes with U-channel is you can't drill through the back of the track into your post
Got
because
it.
the insert's there.
Got it.
Whereas with the side channel you can.
Got it.
So the only reason you'd need the U-channel is to true things up, or especially with the inside mount.
Right.
Now on the Elite track, that doesn't look like, I thought I had that here. Oh, here it is. This is the smaller application, so shades up to 14 feet in width. There is no compatible U-channel with this. So if you needed to pull that away or true things up, the installer will have to just figure something out.
Order
that.
it outside.
Right, or do an outside mount, yes. It's always less problematic when you do an outside mount. You know, you can get more height, you're not worrying about all of this, but we do a lot of inside mounts, and fortunately, this is key. So always remember that the U-channel will sit outside of the plane of the cassette box, but the zipper track will always line up with the cassette box, and the side channel will always, both the backs and the sides. And there are deductions that we take. If you're using the U-channel versus just an inside mount, there's different deductions. An inside mount, we always recommend take a 3/16 inch deduction. And I will remind you of that when we're going over your projects. So 3/16 inch deduction on an inside mount. If you are going to use U-channel, you need to take an additional 3/8 inch because of the thickness of this. So all inside mounts, we say, so in other words, if your inside mount narrowest measurement is 100 and 3/16 inch, you will order that shade at 100. If you're using U-channel and that opening is 100 and 9/16 inch, then we will order that shade at 100 because 3/8 and 3/16 is 9/16. And again, I will go over those deductions. When I see a manual shade inside mount, I will always say, did you deduct an inch? If I see an inside mount with zipper track, I'll go over the deductions that need to be taken. Okay. A couple of other things that help the installers. Our tracks all have channels in the back. So if your client has power source down by the floor, that motor cable can run through the back of the tracks. So you've got that fit and finish and you're not having to do the conduit to cover up that cord that hangs down. You can go through the back of the track here. There is a channel in the zipper track, and even this small side channel, it can fit through. Now keep in mind on this channel, if you're ordering a motor cable with a plug, obviously the plug's not going to fit through there. So if you are going to feed it through, just order your motor cable with pigtails and then pick up a plug. Plugs can be added to the cables. The standard cable length is 6 feet, no pigtails. But if you need a longer run to your power source, they're 12, 18, and 24. The other thing that we do for you, if you tell us where you will tell us motor left or motor right, and that's always from the front of the box. So typically standing outside looking at the shade, is your power going to be on the right side or is it on the left side? And then you can tell us, bring the cord through the top of the box, the side of the box, or the bottom of the box. So it'll already be drilled, the cable will come through, and your plug will be on the end. If you don't tell us and you order it with a plug, then the installer will have to drill the box, for instance, through the top, and he's lost the plug because once you take those NEMA plugs off, they can't be replaced. So the customer or the installer will want to tell us how far away is the power source. Is it going to be a junction box that you're just going to wire to, or is there an outlet? That's the easiest installation. Have your customer have an outlet installed, figure out where it's going to be, order the cable with the plug, you mount the shade, plug it in, and you're good to go. So Valance's cassette box, curved hoods, track options, side channel, cable guide, or the Cadillac with zipper track. Yes?
Am I right in thinking that the Patriot and the Freedom hood really wouldn't be good for shade tree structure? Because you're seeing the exposed barrel from inside the area, if you will, so you go to a cassette rather? Is that
Yeah,
right?
I would absolutely say that. Plus, from an installation standpoint, it cannot be ceiling mounted. It's wall mounted, so I would say it's either going to be an open roll or the cassette box.
So that's really for an existing patio?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. Fabric-wise, to make it easy, I would always lead with Suntex 95 because a 5% openness is a really good range of sun control and yet still allows for visibility outside. That's reason number one. Number two, it's a great exterior fabric. It has a 10-year warranty, and it also comes in 126-inch widths. So when we're dealing with exterior shades, something we have to think about is what is the width and height relationship, and what are we going to do about the fabric? Because if that opening is larger than the fabric we're working with, we have to determine whether the fabric can be railroaded, turned the other way, so that the length of the fabric coming off the roll can run from left to right, and then does the width of the fabric give us enough height for the height of that shade. At 126, you have a better chance of not having to railroad that fabric. You know, maybe you have 12 feet by 9 feet. That 9 feet can fit in that 126, so it's a great fabric to look at. Many of the others are going to be more in the range of 90, 100, and if it's okay to turn that fabric and run it the other way, then there will be a welded seam. The seam is done very, very nicely. In fact, sometimes people don't even notice it, but it will be seamed. So if you can avoid that, it's great.
If we railroad, we have, what, 126 inch?
Mm-hmm.
How much do we lose on the barrel of the hem?
Oh, good question. So on a shade that is 10 feet in drop,
Okay.
the fabric will actually be 132 inches because you will always have a 12-inch wrap on the roller tube.
Okay.
So at 120, you've got 6 inches of that into that wrap. So you've actually got only 6 inches added on for that additional
Right.
12. Does that
It
answer
does,
the question?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So if the fabric does have to be railroaded, a couple of things about that. You can ask your client, do you want the seam to be closest to the top or closest to the bottom? The advantage of closest to the top is just like that scenario we just discussed. You may not even see it. It's just needed because of the wrap.
Mm-hmm.
If it's closest to the bottom, maybe it's not as visible. You might also have a wall around the area, and if you can kind of line up a seam that way, it kind of goes away. So you would specify closest to the top, closest to the bottom, or exact length from the floor, and you would tell us where to put that seam. Not all fabrics can be railroaded, and it certainly is best to avoid railroading fabrics because the structural integrity is such that it's always better to have that fabric hanging up and down. But in the exterior world, it's very common to weld the seams.
When we're dealing with mesh and we talk about openness, it sounds to me like what would be the reason you would go from a 95 to an 80? Just light? You want more light coming in? You want...
That's a good question. The primary reason, Colin, is that people say, I have an amazing view and I just don't feel like I can see it enough.
Okay. So it's just being able to see out
Yes.
from inside your area
Yes.
out to the outside. And that openness just gives you that ability.
Right. Which, in my experience, when a client looks at that 95% sample and holds it up, it gives enough visibility, but everybody's different. The other thing to keep in mind is the darker the color, the easier on the eyes to see through.
Mm-hmm.
So because the lighter colors tend to reflect back on our eyes, so when visibility is an issue, possibly opening up the degree of openness, making that larger, but also sometimes adjusting the color. One thing I just remembered going back to railroading, if you have multiple shades in an application that are all visible, if you're going to railroad one screen, we always recommend that you railroad all of them. Because turning that fabric, especially in some of the tweedy type fabrics, it's going to look like two different fabrics.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you don't have to railroad all of them if they are in close proximity.
Another question on privacy.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a 95% and I have my light, it's dark outside, and I have my light on inside, with the 95% I'm going to have a little more, but still you can still see through,
You can still
right?
see through it.
So really, with a mesh, if your light is, at night, you're really not providing privacy.
Right, and that's a good point,
everybody needs to
because
know that.
we often have people that say we want a blackout shade for the outdoor area, and they want privacy. So what I typically will first present is Ferrari 502. There's a huge color palette, and it's a vinyl product, but I always say, although you can't see through it, oh yes, some of the colors you can see some slight shadowing, just so we're very upfront. It's kind of the same thing as, yes, using this for overhead. I always tell people, if you have bird droppings or you have leaves that fall on top, depending on the color, you're going to see some slight shadowing. And the same thing is true, with light shining through. That slight shadowing is typically acceptable, but if someone says, oh, I don't want to be able to see anything through it, then you would move to the Ferrari B92, which is a true blackout product. And we certainly sell a lot of that for exterior shades. So when somebody's trying to create privacy or total blackout in an exterior application, depending on degree, might work with this, otherwise the B92.
Kathleen, do you know the price difference between a 502 and a 95? The mesh?
The
Percent.
502,
Approximately.
I want to say, is price group 5 or 6, and the 95 is 3. So,
Because that could be a question somebody asks,
Right.
I want privacy. Okay, if you do, well, it's what percentage more,
What's your budget,
Right.
what's your budget?
Yeah, this is
for
gonna,
that?
so in a 24-foot shade, which is a huge shade,
yeah,
the price differential between the 95 and the 502 is going to be about $600 at retail.
okay. So 600.
And that's
Price difference
based
600.
price difference 600. To put it into perspective, that shade, by the time you add the motor and the Valance, that shade's that 24-foot shade is going to be, we'll just call it $7,500.
Right.
So it's less than a 10%
Right,
differential.
okay. So
And when you're spending that amount of money, you might as well get what you want.
Right.
That's a big shade too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So,
So it's
the
probably,
price
it
point's
might
going to
get a
be.
little, I don't know how the percent, but that's a good, somewhere not quite 10%
Right.
for blockout.
Right.
Total blackout, yeah.
Let's go back to motors. We talked about AutoSun. The thing you need to know about motors, or the decision that needs to be made, is AutoSun, RTS, or standard. And beyond that, no one has to know, well, I need this size motor or this, unless Elise is going to price it from the price book. But the difference between RTS and standard, a standard motor is wired to your power source, and then it also has wiring that goes through your wall to the old-fashioned light switch. No one does that anymore. But we offer it because sometimes people want that kind of motorization. Probably the biggest reason is if somebody says, I live near a military installation and there's all kinds of frequencies and remote things are problematic. That's about the time that I typically, most often hear that somebody's going to use a standard. Most of the motors that we sell are going to be RTS. So that motor has to be wired to a power source or plugged into an outlet. But all the controls, the remote, or even the wall switch plate, which is just a plate on the outside, speaks to that motor wirelessly. And in the RTS world, because so many people are going with home automation, or they want to be able to operate those shades from their iPhones or their iPads, you can also add in the Somfy MyLink, which will allow that to happen. So if somebody has a Somfy MyLink, they can be across the country and go into their phone and tell their phone to raise or lower that shade.
I can adjust the Y in Marion from my phone.
That's right, you can do that. You can do that. So I think that's a good segue, Dawn, into, I just want to also put in a pitch for interior. Just so you know, you have that in the back of your pocket. Dawn went out to a YMCA. They initially said, we want exterior shades. When he got out there, when it was all said and done, that really wasn't the right fit. It was interior. And had Don not had interior in his back pocket, we would have given that to another manufacturer. So just know that Polar Shades really did start based on interior. We do anything and everything when it comes to interior. And a big category in the market, both for commercial and residential, is a duo shade interior product. And so with the duo shade, what that allows you to do is with one bracket, you can hang two separate shades. So during the day, you have solar protection during the day, and at night you have blackout. We have a multitude of duo shade brackets depending on how deep the window is, how large it needs to be. Huge, huge application. Something that Polar Shades does with their brackets for interior is that we do offer an adjustable bracket. So for those openings where you need to have the window fascia, the fascia over the roll, flush up against the opening for the fit and finish, but that opening is not completely level, the pin on this bracket allows you to make that adjustment on one side. So you've got that fascia flush to the opening, but the roller tube is also level. So big time saver. Installing interior is so straightforward. So just know that it's available. You might go out and do an exterior application, and your client may even say to you, now I need to also look at interior. And so we can help you with that as well. This I like to show, this is our mega tube, 4.75 inches. It's huge, and this is what we use because you have shades that you can sell up to 24 feet in width, and that's what this is used for. So huge category, especially in commercial, that's available. Do we want to talk about this briefly for the Equinox, the head box?
We can.
Okay. Another Valance option is our head pocket. Obviously for exterior use it would be a much larger box than this, but what we're doing here at Shade Tree this week is installing exterior shades on the Equinox, and the angle design of this head pocket just really lends itself to the structure. So we'll have more information on that later, but it seems to be a good fit for the Equinox. And when you use a head pocket, the final step after the shade is installed is that there's a closure plate that clamps onto the bottom so that even from underneath, it really has a nice fit and finish all the way around. In an exterior application, your closure plate's not going to be this deep like it can be in interior. So this may be something that you'll want to use with the Equinox application. Any questions? Anything?
That was very good. Very informative.
Good.
Like, fantastic.
My goal is to simplify this, and if you ask leading questions, motorized manual, do you want a covering on your shade? Let's talk about guides. Do you have wind? I have light wind. I'd like to keep that hem bar in place. Great. Side channels would be really great. Do you have posts that you can attach it to? No, I don't. It's an open area. No problem. We've got the cable guide. Mrs. Jones that has bugs problems or really wants to seal it in for climate control, keep rain out, then you're moving into the zip shade category. If you ask those questions and you get approximate measurements, then there's a lot of information we can get out to the customer. Another leading question that can really simplify the process even more is to say, We have very detailed installation instructions. Is this something that you are planning to install yourself, or do you have a local handyman? And you will be very, very surprised at how many people say, you know, I'd like to look at the instructions, I could probably do that. And your life has just gotten that much easier. So lots of support from that standpoint.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we'll get back
It's
to
time to install.
installation.
Let's go, done.